You're listening to Requiem Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And this is a little special message because what you're about to hear is an example of one of our Patreon shows. As we mentioned in our Demolition Hammer episode, we're kind of taking a couple week break so we can do some research for some kind of future projects that we're working on. And so if you like what you're about to hear, it's a little bit more laid back and loose and a little bit more open and conversational, like we've brought into some of the more recent, new episodes. You can sign up on patreon.com/Requiem podcast if you like what you hear and you want to get more of these, or you can go to requiemmetal.com where our first 160 episodes are. And there's also a link that you can click on that website. So we hope you enjoy this very special journey. It's a year-old Patreon episode, but I think you'll like what you hear. So,
how many episodes do you think we have up there?
Oh, we probably have at this point at least probably 20. We've been putting them up there for about two and a half years at least. So,
and they're all between 2.5 to 3.5 hours each. So
yeah, 2.5 to 3.
If you've gone through the whole catalog, this is a nice.
If you're looking for more Requiem stuff and you like kind of the tenor of Mark and I's kind of conversations and things, I think the Patreon stuff is definitely for you. So sign up. We think we're worth it. We think especially the thrash series we just got done doing is some of the best work of our 13-year career, and we'd love your support and love to give you access to more of these special episodes that you're about to hear. So enjoy.
Hey, this is the February 2019 special episode for our patrons.
Number two.
Yeah. And you just heard Orion, the Metallica song. If you didn't know that.
That's from Metallica?
It's from Metallica.
That's really interesting.
It's from the album
Master of Puppets. So we took to heart when we were called out in a letter on our 200th episode that we've almost gone to great lengths to avoid Metallica.
We talk about them in almost every single episode.
We do. And so we thought, it might be a good idea if we kind of get this, clear the table a little bit with a patron episode. But it's always been that question mark. How do we kind of approach, Metallica?
Metallica is kind of like our first real awesome girlfriend who made us feel certain things that we measure everything else kind of up against, really.
Yeah, and it's like good memories, bad memories, because there's been some disappointment through the years. There's been some letdowns, like the breakup, so it's some emotional scars here and there. But it's like, I'm friends with a lot of my exes now, and I think I have some perspective on some of the bad decisions that either I made or we both made or they made. And I've kind of come to terms with some of those eras of Metallica. Like I can pull some songs off of Load and Reload that I don't hate. I don't put those records on as a singular whole. I've never really spent any time with Saint Anger. It's not really something. I'm sure there's something that's maybe of value to it, but maybe there isn't, and I don't care, and it's fine. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I think I can live my life and be okay with that.
Recently, I'm trying to think who the hell asked me this, but they asked me what I thought of, basically like past classic era Metallica.
Yeah,
and I said, they made some of the best, most effective albums that affected my life as a teenager.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine them ever going any further on the track they were on.
Yeah.
And they accomplished everything they wanted to accomplish in a very, comparatively to now, like a music career, from what, 1980 when did they form in 80?
81.
81-ish?
Yeah. 81.
To 90?
No Life Till Leather is 82, I think,
Within 10 years, they created some records that are just undeniable. People still go back to you have that. You can't. Where could you possibly go after the Black Album?
Yeah, you kind of own a decade. In terms of a block of sort of metal history.
And I went through all of us have. I mean, anybody that has lived more than 20 years you hit these points. Kind of places where you can't you can't imagine going any. That's just kind of the end of it. It seems like. But then you go out and you discover this other type of music or this other, type of food, or you move somewhere else. We can't all be on that same, there's no way they could have done 12 albums that were that good.
Well, and
I understand why they did what they got completely away from it.
Yeah.
Everybody cut their hair. All makes sense to me in retrospect.
Yeah. Well, and there's different eras where our perception of things are sort of different. And there was a moment, and I kind of said to you that I think what's interesting about Metallica is they almost get crucified for it. But in a way, I think maybe a different way of looking at it is maybe we should kind of give honors to them for being ahead of the curve and noticing that thrash was going to kind of come to an end before any of their contemporaries did. They get
I'm sure it wasn't a conscious decision.
No, but I think it was kind of internal subconscious.
But they're pushing themselves so hard.
Yeah.
The first record came out, nobody could hold a candle to that. I think the biggest thing they did is capture the live sound on a record.
Yeah.
Or the closest approximation thereof.
They took the speed of Motorhead. They took just some of the aggression of the punk that they were sort of absorbing, and you got the melodies of Nawabum sort of mixed in there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Kill 'Em All is rough. Yeah. In a good way. It's not a bad thing. It's just it's not polished. They didn't really have great production at that point. Fleming Rasmussen, I mean, we were just kind of talking about him. He doesn't show up till Ride, I believe, when they actually kind of get a proper understanding of, and I'm sure when you went in with the material on Kill 'Em All, I got to look and see who actually, I forget who kind of produced that record.
I don't remember either.
Yeah. Oh, John Zazulu. All right.
Oh, okay. So, from Megaforce.
Yeah. And, it's hard to say whether or not he had a handle on what that music should even sound like, right? Like no one knew how to capture speed and ferocity like that.
That's been the biggest problem with, I think, with extreme music in general, is how like Venom, the idea, the visuals, it all looks great. Then you hear it on record, you're like, oh, that's what it sounds like. But seeing it at a concert, would have been like a transformative, experience for a kid. Or Motorhead, Motorhead were pretty early on captured fairly accurately.
Yeah, and I think
the
that's
first
why
record's
people
pretty tame.
No Sleep Till Hammersmith so much, because I think it kind of, there was a part of Motorhead that is kind of like a live biker rock, the down rowdy kind of sound that they got on record sometimes, but I think live it maybe comes over a little bit better
for sure.
But yeah, Kill 'Em All, it's an interesting record. It's never been my favorite Metallica. I know there are some people that beloved that record as like the epitome of Metallica, that after that they sold out, or I don't know. I've heard that before. I mean, there's some people I know that don't like Slayer past Show No Mercy because they're just like, that was it. It's just so the
personal.
Internet's a funny place.
And everything. So like the reason people were pissed about, the reason I was let down by the Black Album is because I didn't discover Metallica back in Kill 'Em All or Ride the Lightning.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't like, I wanted them to keep I wanted my expectation to keep kind of going from where, like the first thing I heard was Master of Puppets. First thing I bought was Injustice for All, which is hard to, what do you do after that album? And then the Black Album I thought was, like, in retrospect, that's all you could have done really, if you wanted to keep kind of going this track.
Yeah. It's,
but it's like where you fall in and what your expectation, there's so many different criteria to like what.
Yeah. And I think, there's I forget his name, the journalist. He's now the editor in chief of Rolling Stone. Peter, he's got glasses. Oh no, it's David Frick. Yeah. David Frick in a documentary says he was, after Injustice for All, he had a conversation with Hetfield and those guys, and was like, how do you get heavier? Like, how do you get like more sonic than this? You can't get really faster. You've kind of gotten, like, you've done what you're going to do there. And there's some limitations, I think, when you talk about like Lars and,
sure,
what he can do to get, he's not Dave Lombardo or Gene Hoglan. He's not going to be able to take.
He's a conventional drummer too. Yeah.
And so in a way it was like the Black Album was like their attempt to sort of go back to square one a little bit, with a new producer, with a guy that got them all into one room to record, which they'd never done before, to kind of, so they could bounce off of each other a little bit and get some more of that live sound kind of captured. Because apparently, and I've only seen Metallica live in recent times, but, if you had gone to those shows in the 80s, that Metallica was even better live than they were even on record. And so, for whatever it's worth, I think Bob Rock and what he was trying to do was trying to sort of get that live sound back to Metallica after, and I know we're going to talk about Injustice for All a little bit, but there's something very kind of clinical and I don't want to say sterile. Sterile's the wrong word, but there's something very precise about Injustice for All that
calculated on.
Yeah, and that's great. We both love that record, but it lacks a certain warmth to it. And I think the Black Album has a lot of that bottom end kind of warmth, It's kind of the potential of what a pop producer could bring to it. Just like what it's Back in Black from AC/DC,
what the fuck is the guy's name? Rick Rubin brought to Slayer.
Yeah, for sure.
That potential of what you could do to extreme music.
Yeah, because like Hell Awaits with Bill Meteor from Metal Blade doing that, it had like a son of that cavernous, merciful fate.
The chorus, the echo, reverb,
a lot of reverb and stuff like that.
That was like the cheat that everybody used because they didn't know how to record that stuff. It's like, let's put some reverb on it.
And again, like I mean, Hell Awaits in some ways is like it represents like the end of a certain Slayer narrative, right? Like epic songs, long, and things like that. And
one of the best opening tracks on a Slayer record.
It's incredible. Yeah. I mean, like At Dawn They Sleep. Like there's a lot of things happening that I love about Hell Awaits, and it's hard to like compare Hell Awaits to Rain and Blood. To me, it's like almost like comparing Injustice for All, the Black Album. Like they're operating in like two kind of completely different orbits in a way,
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we want to call this episode, I kind of reached out to the patron fans and kind of asked what sort of stuff they were interested in. Contrarian episodes seem to be something kind of interesting. We've done stuff like that before. We pitted two Deep Purple records against each other. We did that with a kind of Fear Factory, where I'm more the fan than you're not so much.
Yeah.
We're both huge fans of Metallica. We've talked about Metallica, especially when Hardwired came out, and we kind of did the Big Four episodes, and we kind of ranked some things. And
I still feel that was like a really honest representation of all that stuff, like the way we broke it down.
For sure.
Well, it was very, I didn't feel like I was being pulled one way or another, like emotionally at all.
Yeah.
It was very like, okay, I think,
Slayer won in the point total. Like, what do you do?
But then Megadeth won overall, didn't they?
No, Slayer won overall.
Did they win overall?
Yeah, they won. Just like I think they were a point ahead of Anthrax. I think ended up fourth, and Megadeth was third, Metallica was second. And most people would just assume Metallica would win because Metallica has all the accoutrements that say they should win in terms of like mainstream appeal and
legacy
and what they've done. Yeah, I mean, no one's going to argue that. They're the biggest metal band of the 1980s. No matter how much I would love to argue it's like Iron Maiden, because I feel more strongly about Maiden now because I've stayed with Maiden beyond the 80s a little
they
bit.
didn't buck you off. And
I mean, maybe they did with the Blaze era, but then they kind of brought me back. Yeah, for sure.
X Factor, I think, is a great record.
Yep, and that would be a fun, maybe Patreon episode or Contrarian episode to do down the road, is the Blaze Bayley era. But yeah, people kind of, I don't know where I was going with that thought. Oh, but I think like, Slayer, in terms of what we do and kind of how we set up that ranking system, I think Slayer just like eked it out a little bit, because I think Slayer kind of, you could make this as a critique or you could make this as a positive, but Slayer kind of stuck to the script a little bit more.
Yeah. I was the most surprised that Megadeth ranked as high, because I haven't really cared about their output in so many years.
Yeah. And that would be a great, I think that would be a kind of a fun patron episode we could do down the road too, is talking about non-Rest in Peace Megadeth, because I'm a huge fan of it and you're pretty lukewarm on some of that stuff.
Yeah.
Killing and Peace Sells especially. I think we could kind of talk about those records, because you're like, I don't know, you've always struck me as not as much of a Megadeth fan, which is fine.
It was just like everything was, this or that when I was a kid. Like you couldn't be multiple things. Right. Like you were either Iron Maiden or Judas Priest. You were Megadeth or Metallica, and I was always in the Metallica side.
Guy.
And then Rust in Peace came out. I was like, "Fuck, this is good." But
I think by the time
everything else,
I got into all of it, Metallica's legacy was already like strange by then.
Yeah,
and it's funny because on some level, you could make an argument that once the Black Album kind of faded in like '92, maybe is when like really Metallica kind of, they're still on Headbangers and stuff, but like they were kind of quieter than maybe they were in 90, 91. That Megadeth put out Countdown to Extinction in 92 and Euthanasia in 94, and they had more of a presence on MTV and on like hard rock radio in my era. Like 92 is me entering middle school. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
They had a weird mainstream success they never had before.
Yeah, it was really strange. Whereas Metallica had achieved so much in the 80s into the early 90s that Megadeth in a way was such a hot fucking mess because of the drugs and just the in and out of different like resentment, the revolving door of guitar players and drummers, and just that like once they got Nick Menza and Marty Friedman and Dave cleaned up a little bit, like all of a sudden Dave was on MTV doing like Rock the Vote shit in 92, and like he was playing the national anthem before like the you probably don't remember this because you didn't grow up with cable like I did, but they used to do like celebrity softball games on MTV, and it would be like and like Dave Mustaine played
from that.
Yeah, he played the national anthem like Jimi Hendrix style to start off that. Like there was like Dave Mustaine suddenly like was like Warm and Fuzzy for like a little while, and like Megadeth, Sweating Bullets was on like TRL all the time. It was like the requested video and blah. It was just it was like a weird moment there for a couple of years where Megadeth seemed kind of normal and stuff, and I don't know. And that was a point where I think I was spending a lot more time with Metallica, going back and listening to like Ride and stuff that I had missed, obviously because of my age and things like that. But so I guess that, when we frame this, we open with Orion for Master of Puppets, and what we kind of decided to do is like to not really contrarian, because I don't think Mark and I are going to like sit here and argue the lack of worth of any of the like first 4 and really even 5 Metallica records, because I think we both have come to peace with the Black Album that it's a really great record. It's really well done. It's the good songwriting is crisp, regardless of how many times you may or may not have heard those songs to the point of nausea, where you just don't care about. Like
Side 2, man. I still like Side 2 a lot.
Yeah, Side 2 is great because it didn't get overplayed as much.
Yeah.
I can remove myself, and it's hard to do, but I can do it because I think teaching the rock and roll history class, I have to do this sometimes with songs that I don't ever need to hear again for the rest of my life. But I can look at Enter Sandman and I can look at it through the eyes of like a 10 or 11-year-old, which is what I was when I heard it. And I can say, that's a fucking amazing song for a 10 and 11-year-old.
Tells a story.
It's perfectly it's sonic, it's got everything. To me, that song is, and maybe I equate these two things together, it's the Terminator 2 of like metal songs. Terminator 2 is not necessarily better than Terminator 1. Terminator 1 has like a certain quality of original ideas to it that's great, and
nudity.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Linda Hamilton. But Terminator 2 is like this pop music. It's this pop.
Yeah.
Like, I saw that movie 6 times in the theater. 6 times we went. Like, we rode our bikes because it was the perfect movie for like a 7th grader.
And it was the sequel that nobody knew they wanted.
Exactly. And it was not rated R. So like, or maybe it was. It was.
Was it?
Yeah, it might have been. But it didn't feel like an R movie. It felt like big. It felt mainstream. You had the Guns N' Roses soundtrack on MTV all the time.
It might have been PG-13.
It might have been too. I can't remember. We'll have to look.
Because the violence isn't over the top.
Yeah, and I
like all the really gory
Arnold's
scenes.
nude, but like you see his butt, but that's about it.
You can see a butt after. Yeah, I think that falls in that. But I think the most of the gory scenes, like when they go into the garage and he gets kind of fixed up.
Yeah.
The really explicit scenes are taken out.
It might be PG. It might have been like the perfect kind of like middle ground.
It's the first movie that ruined horror and action movies by making them PG-13.
Oh yeah, there you go.
We had the 80s of Commando and Total Recall and all these like great
hard R movies, RoboCop, all that.
And
kind
I
of stuff.
saw all those as a child. I saw RoboCop when I was 12 years old.
I wanted to see RoboCop. I was only 8, so like it was tough because I couldn't convince anybody. Like my mom didn't like those movies, so I had to kind of like. Either my dad would show me stuff when I go and stay with my dad. That's where I saw Commando and Pet Sematary, and just my mom hated horror movies. She liked action movies, so we would but she didn't really like over the top gory action movies. So like she was more like, okay, I can stomach Die Hard.
Yeah,
like Die Hard seems like and I get it because Die Hard's kind of like a perfect action movie. It's got like something for everyone. It's like warm and fuzzy. It's not like Predator's probably a step too far for my mom. Yeah, on some level, it's a little it's a little grim,
It's really gory.
Yeah, real gory. Yeah. It's very much a dude movie. There's not like a.
It's just full of testosterone. Yeah, as soon as they grab both arms and they're like shaking each other's arms and their biceps are ready to pop. I
don't know if that appealed to my mom necessarily. But I think Metallica Black Album kind of falls into that it's like the perfect thing to sort of discover at a certain age, and
that time it was.
I still get warm, fuzzy feelings about some of that stuff. I mean, you couldn't not see the videos for Unforgiven was constant. Nothing Else Matters was constant. All that kind of stuff. I mean, I remember
there's a certain sense of pride too of like the band you followed at that time seemed like so many years, which is probably 2 years.
Yeah.
But as a kid, that's a fucking eternity, and they were getting a little bit of mainstream success, so you get in the car with somebody and they'd play whatever. I can't think of what else was going on at the time. But then like Enter Sandman came out. I was like, oh, yeah, it's not bad. Yeah. And then you get a little bit of the resentment because, well, I followed them through this tough period. I mean, that's just the way a lot of this stuff goes for success.
It's a complicated legacy.
Yeah.
So basically what Mark and I did is we picked out kind of our tentpole records that like from either a nostalgia or maybe a non-intellectual
an emotional level,
gut sort of level, and it was tough for me because it's not the Black Album as much as we're kind of talking about the Black Album, just kind of frame the conversation, but it was kind of a toss up for me between Ride the Lightning, which intellectually I think I know is the better pure thrash record. I think it's I think it didn't Decibel. I think when they ranked their thrash records, I think they had it at like number 1 or number 2. It was like right there with Rain and Blood. You know, like it's something like it's you know, it works. It's sonic. It's fat. I mean, Fight Fire with Fire is like, I think I told Mark this. I think it predates. I don't know the exact release dates, but I think it beat Haunting the Chapel as a release. Because Show No Mercy was still very much kind of in the Judas Priest kind of mold. It wasn't like super fast yet. I mean, it had some, you know, Black Magic. It had some songs that were like, you know, going for the gusto, but
it was kind of more in the new album
for sure
than thrash.
You know, and Kill 'Em All. So Kill 'Em All really, in a way, was like the fiercest thing that kind of had come out of like thrash. I'm sure there's some like weird underground thrash record that I'm forgetting, but for the most part, like Kill 'Em All set the bar, and Ride the Lightning upped the bar in a way because it added some technical proficiency, better production, all that sort of stuff. And then you could make an argument that like when Haunting the Chapel came out and you heard like Capture of Sin, sorry, that was like, whoa, because Lombardo suddenly upped his game. And when Lombardo started to push through, it sort of sets the scene for like the Exodus and the Dark Angels and this whole other like other form of thrash. So in a way, like Metallica, you could make an argument like peaked out with traditional thrash at Ride the Lightning. By the time you get to Master of Puppets, which is the album I eventually settled on, like I think Master of Puppets like is, you know, it's always considered like one of the best thrash albums of all time, but I think it goes beyond thrash. I think that was the record in a lot of ways that made Metallica digestible to a certain mainstream audience, not completely, because again, no videos yet, no radio releases,
but like that Iron Maiden, you know, kind of crowd, the hardcore like heavy metal
it's
crowd.
Like the Number of the Beast or the Power Slave of Metallica in a way.
This is the era when they were doing like Iron Maiden style stage shows, and they're just, I remember like seeing pictures of the Master Puppet stage, you know, with all the different like headstones and shit. I was like, God, that would have been so fucking cool to see back in the day, or the Lady Justice from you know, Justice for All. But
and I can count, and here's kind of a story. There are 3 moments that I really think of where, and this is something like younger people aren't going to really appreciate, especially if you've grown up with a lot of YouTube, but you might remember sitting with your stereo with a blank cassette, record, play, pause, just waiting.
Oh yeah, for the radio.
For something. For you knew there was something. And there are 3 songs, and I think these 3 songs like have stood the test of time from a historical standpoint. There are 3 songs I remember hearing on, I don't know if it was Z93 or whatever, you know, rock show, metal show that was kind of on, that stunned me. And I remember kind of a chemical sort of change happening in my brain. The first 2 are pretty predictable from like a classic rock standpoint. The first time I like conceived of and processed Stairway to Heaven, like it was like I was kind of paused, like kind of actually able to kind of follow like the transitions of that song and the solo and the build, and like it was just very emotional to me. I was like, whoa, okay. And at the time I didn't realize that song was so overplayed, you know, because it was like the first time I heard it. So like, you know, it's sort of like Plato's like allegory of the cave. Like you only like know what you know because you only know what you know. Like you're only what this is, this sort of spectrum of your perception. And so for me, the first time I heard Stairway to Heaven, it was like the greatest song in the world. If I had like gone to somebody 10 years or 5 years older than me and been like, have you heard Stairway to Heaven? They would have just been like, get the fuck away from me. Like, of course I've heard Stairway to Heaven. What the fuck do I care? You know? But like the first time I heard it and really like, it was a big moment. All Along the Watchtower from Jimi Hendrix was another one where like, it felt really important. There's just like something about that song, like it kind of overwhelmed me.
Feel the weight of it.
It's just like heavy. And like still to this day in my rock history class, kids will ask me like, what is your favorite rock and roll song? And it's All Along the Watchtower because it's Dylan writing the lyrics and Hendrix playing them. It's like this perfect merger of these two like forces of like rock history. It's not my favorite song, but it's like, if I had to pick the quintessential song that represents like all eras of rock and roll, like that song kind of has it all. And then it was Master of Puppets. And the first, I had already heard Enter Sandman, and I had heard all that stuff. And I had probably seen, I think I have memory of seeing the video for one. But when I saw the video for one, I think I was 10. And I was a little eerie. Like I was trying to
I don't think you really grasped.
I was trying to process what was sort of happening. I don't think I knew a lot about world wars at that point.
Yeah.
You know, I probably knew about World War II a little bit just from pop culture or whatever. But
I did recognize Jason Robards in that from
did
something
you?
else.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, that's good. Yeah, I did not. I think everything in black and white at that stage scared me. I have some real distinct memories of accidentally when I was like 5 or 6. USA Network used to play Alfred Hitchcock Presents when I was younger, and I accidentally was like, up because my mom, TV was my babysitter. My mom was a single mom working lots of jobs, so sometimes I just kind of got left alone. And I watched some like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and it was in black and white, and it really like something about it like creeped me out a lot. And this is funny. To the point where it created some kind of like psychosomatic thing in me, so that when Don Henley's Boys of Summer video came out and it was in black and white, I hated it and it scared me. Like I was like, I thought it was like an Alfred Hitchcock thing. So it was like real eerie. So anyways, when Metallica 1 came out, like I was like, whoa, these guys are serious. I hadn't really heard.
Yeah.
I was used to rap videos, Motley Crue, Poison. Like Metallica seemed like, where the fuck did these guys come from? Like I
that was a bucket of water in everybody's head.
Yeah, it was real strange. So I liked 1 probably instinctively, but I hadn't spent a lot of time with it. But to me, when I heard Master of Puppets and I heard symphonic movements like in it, you heard the speed at the beginning, then like after the second chorus, it like slows down and goes into that doom, 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 this acoustic thing, and then it builds and builds. It was like my introduction almost to like symphonic classical music, but I didn't know where they were.
Modern
like,
Wagner.
It was like super like weird and emotional and all these just movements and stuff like that. And that song, like when I heard it on the radio, I guess that's when like everything I had been reading about, because Metallica came up in a lot of things. In Hit Parader, they got sort of side mention. But like they didn't look like Poison or Bon Jovi or any of those bands, so I just like dismissed it. I didn't really know what Metallica was. When I was in elementary school, there was a kid that had a Metallica shirt, and it was the time where like MTV was banned in my house for like 6 months because of Twisted Sister, and I was going to church for the only time in my life, and so I was a little brainwashed. They had tried to get me to get rid of like my Motley Crue tapes and stuff. So I went up to this kid that was wearing I was in 3rd grade, and I said, Metallica worships the devil. You shouldn't be wearing that shirt. And like now I just laugh about it, whatever. But so like my perceptions of Metallica were really, really weird. But when I heard Master of Puppets, it like was the missing puzzle piece for me, because it's if we're being honest, it's the best execution of all the ideas Metallica really ever had in one record. It's not the most prog. That's going to come when you're going to talk about Injustice for All a little bit and your perception on it. It's not the most thrash. In a way, it's like Ride the Lightning. It's not the most cult. In a way, that's Kill 'Em All. It's not the poppiest or like the best kind of like punchy Enter Sandman-y kind of stuff. That's going to come with the Black Album. But it's all of those things at this tipping point right in the middle of the 80s. And I think that's why... historians sort of feel pretty strongly about it that it or Rain and Blood is kind of the ultimate thrash record. I think Rain and Blood's the ultimate thrash record if you're staying in the thrash lane. Yeah. I think Metallica Master of Puppets is this, you could look at like, you mentioned, Iron Maiden before. Like you could mention, there's a certain aspect about like the first album in Killers. We did that Paul Di'Anno record, where you could make an argument that there are some people that probably feel strongly that those are the truest, most Iron Maiden records or something like that. There's some energy about them. I see those kind of like Kill 'Em All, maybe even Ride the Lightning a little bit, by time you get to Killers. But like in a way, what Bruce and what the songwriting in all the like longer songs and epic sort of things that start to come together, with Hallowed Be Thy Name, and then with Power Slave, with Rime of the Ancient Man, like all that stuff is really like what to me Master of Puppets kind of is. It's all that stuff all happening together. It's like it's got all the epic stuff going on. Does it have the most epic stuff? I don't know. Does it have the most complicated riffs? No, probably not. That's probably Injustice. Is it the fastest? I don't think anything is as fast as Fight Fire with Fire. Yeah. But Battery and Damage Incorporated give a pretty good run for its money. So I think it's like, if I had to desert island of Metallica, for me, it's probably Master of Puppets, because I get everything I ever wanted out of it in like one sitting in a weird way.
It's also the end of an era.
And the reason we open with Orion is I think, the thing that for me is always going to be the anchor for Metallica maybe is probably Cliff in some level. Like I love Hammett. I think Hetfield might be the greatest rhythm lead thrash guy like of all time, that kind of combo.
His harmonies are unbelievable.
He just nails it. Like his palm muting, like all of it's just like he's perfect at what that's supposed to be. I think Scotty Ian's a pretty amazing rhythm guy too. Anthrax was never really known for their like leads the way like other thrash bands were, but I think the appeal.
But Hetfield's also a writer too.
That's for sure. And I think Scotty
Ian's
wrote
not. He's Charlie Benante is like the major songwriter.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right. He's kind of the guy there. But it's interesting because Hetfield and Lars are kind of like a Benante Ian kind of thing. Like they're just always together.
Yeah.
They'll be like
I think the
two constants.
The contrarianness between the two is what made good music.
For sure. Yeah. So I think Cliff Burton for me is like the sort of X factor. And I think he was at his peak probably on Master of Puppets. I think he's the guy that sort of added warmth that like, not just the bottom end, that you expect out of like great bass playing, but I think he was the guy. We talked about it in the 82 episode, I believe, when we were talking about kind of like early thrash and stuff like that. But Burton was the guy who was like more into traditional like heavy metal and hard rock in the 70s. I think he kept them anchored in a way with like, hey, we could do this like 8-minute song and that's great, but let's make sure like it has like some emotion. Like let's make sure like there's a hook, all those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
I think he kind of adds a little bit of that too, because he was the guy. He wasn't really coming from a Nawabum background or a punk background like Lars and James and some of those guys were. He was I don't know if he was older necessarily, but he was like hanging out with like more like hippie bands. He wore bell bottoms. Like
he definitely stood out. I mean, he was kind of outside of Steve Harris. He's the only bass player I ever knew who they were. Mm-hmm. And he's the only bass player that made a difference in a band like that. Like as far as like heavy metal, extreme stuff, like nobody knows who Ian Hill was until you could read the back of the, And
God bless him. I love Tom, but outside of like a few moments on like Hello Waits, like Tom's pretty well buried. Lombardo is the rhythm section of that band because he's so spectacular. And I didn't know who Steve DiGiorgio or any of those guys were yet. But yeah, I don't know. So
the mythic kind of status was added to him too because he was cut short.
He died young
after they put out a record that was hailed as the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And they're riding this high, and then you just get kicked right in the dick.
Yeah, it's it is, and I think you hear him do the solo in Orion there, along with Hetfield and Hammett and stuff like that. And I think they're just, it's always been curious. It's a great what if. What would Metallica have done after Master of Puppets if Cliff had stayed around? Like I don't know. You're gonna kind of talk a little bit about And Justice for All, and that's obviously a very contrarian, controversial record to a lot of people, depending on what your feelings on bass playing are, or like, catharsis or whatever you want to pull out of that record. Or, but Master of Puppets to me, Master of Puppets almost predicts the Black Album more than Injustice for All does to me, because there's
more direct.
There's hooks. There's a more traditional songwriting in some of the stuff that they're doing. It's obviously still very sonic. It's still very thrash, but you can hear some stuff in like Welcome Home Sanitarium or, even like Battery or, there's even really Master of Puppets. Master of Puppets is a pretty conventional, like hooky song for as like raw and like 8 minutes long. Like there's not a lot, more so than One. I mean, One to me is a more impenetrable song. And it's interesting that One becomes like the first, like, MTV Metallica, if Metallica had maybe ponied up, and I think they always took pride in the fact that they got popular by not doing music videos, that they were like this underground band that had kind of was like outselling like MTV bands, that's a point of pride. I get that. And when they finally, decided to start making music videos and stuff like that, I don't think they made bad ones. I think they actually were pretty interesting music videos.
Yeah, even Black Album ones are.
Yeah,
were quite
I think Unforgiven's a pretty fucking weird video for like a bunch of like middle school kids to be like trying to make sense of. I don't know, maybe nothing else matters, a little warm and fuzzy for some people, but fuck it, like whatever, like you don't.
Yeah,
they have nothing to prove at that point, you know.
Sure,
like
absolutely.
No one's going to question their hardness or whatever. I just think they're interesting. I think they did whatever they wanted to do when they wanted to do it, and I don't fault them for that. It doesn't mean I'm going to go along on the ride the whole time.
Yeah, I got off quite a few times, but
you know,
there's always that anticipation of, man, if they could just get just a little bit of it.
I know.
You know, Hardwired, we got a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, you tasted it a little bit, spit out the bone, I think, especially.
Yeah. I mean, lyrically it was stupid, but musically I felt a little, like, I was, like, excited a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of harmony coming back that, you know, Hetfield's known for writing those 2-part harmonies. They're very new album, but his were always just so fucking sad.
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
Or powerful, but, you know, it was like classical music. It was powerful and emotive. And
well, I think, you know, bringing up the classical music thing, I think there's some kind of classical music sort of structure, especially to, you know, Orion, Call of Cthulhu. I can't think of a lot of other bands. I mean, I think Iron Maiden's the only band I can think of in this era that was kind of mainstream popular that was doing instrumentals.
Yeah, and that wasn't relying on any type of like radio play. I don't think Metallica was really on the radio much until...
Well, I think Master of Puppets got on the radio. I don't think it was released as a single. Maybe it was. I might be wrong on that, but I don't think...
I can't remember, but...
I think, again, going back to the story I told before, you know, the famous story about Stairway to Heaven is that it was never released. You know, like the sheer will of radio DJs and people that had a better sense than music companies did is what got that song on the radio to the point where it's the most requested song ever in the history of FM radio.
That's crazy.
You know, so like they released other songs from Led Zeppelin 4, and I think Metallica's sort of the same. I think, you know, if you were hosting like rock shows, you know, and you were supposed to, in 1986, you were supposed to play... I don't know, Living on a Prayer from Bon Jovi, and you were supposed to play Judas Priest Turbo, and maybe Iron Maiden released Wasted Years from Somewhere in Time. I think they did, you know, or but I don't think Metallica told radio what to play and what they didn't have a single, and I think it was up to radio DJs to sort of like say, this song's fucking awesome, like we're just gonna play. It's 8 minutes long. But we're just going to play it. You know, Stairway to Heaven is, you know, it's 8 minutes long or whatever too. So they're not conventional songs that you kind of put on. And I think Master of Puppets is just this fascinating. It's the biggest. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's the biggest the metal underground will ever get. Because I don't think, you know, Black Sabbath was putting songs out on the radio right from the get go.
Sure.
Priest, I don't think...
I never really say that Priests were underground.
Yeah, I don't know what they were. Maybe on Sad Wings.
Is very different.
Yeah, maybe on Sad Wings. I'm not sure.
Sure, but that didn't really get a whole lot of... They didn't really get radio.
No, but I was going to say they're not what Metallica... You know, I think Metallica, and I think the reason people are so... And maybe this gets to the point... correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe the emotional attachment to Metallica that people had, the betrayed feelings, the butthurt stuff that happens with the Black Album and Load and Reload, is that for a certain generation, and I'm not part of that generation, so I can't speak to this, I'm just talking intellectually, but in some capacity, that within the realm of heavy metal, Metallica was the biggest the underground ever felt before it exploded into the mainstream. And Master of Puppets is the very peak of that, because there were no MTV videos. They were just doing it off sheer willpower, sheer touring, live shows,
attitude, reputation,
all of it. And I mean, you could make an argument that, like, what I don't know, in our era, maybe our era sort of post like mid 90s, who's even touched, you know, Opeth, Mastodon, you know, who are the bands that like were like, they were like balloons being filled with air that hadn't yet popped, and they were getting like real close. But were they touching? I mean, none of them were fucking anywhere close to what Master of Puppets was doing, you know?
No.
So that's what I mean. I think maybe there's that emotional attachment of betrayal because they felt so personal to the largest block of underground metal fans that's ever happened in the history of heavy metal without sort of selling out anything. And then I think
it got popular in spite of what it was.
In spite of everything else. Yeah, it did exactly what it wanted to do. It was uncompromising. And I think even though, they put out the one video a couple years later with Injustice, I still think you felt Metallica fans weren't betrayed by that, because it was very ominous and dark and still an impenetrable record. It's not that's not a record that's catering to radio or MTV.
Was it a 68-minute record?
Yeah, and I mean the shortest songs like Dyer's Eve at like 6 minutes or something like that. I mean, I think it had at least three songs that were 8 minutes or longer.
Yeah,
and then like a couple that were like 6.5, 7. I mean, like Blackened, I believe, is like 7. Injustice for All, the title track, is 8. To Live As His Eye is like 8. Harvest of Sorrow is like 6.5, maybe. Eye of the Beholder, like what, 6.5. The non-edited version of 1 is over 7. So like none of those songs are catering to like what was the trend in 1988. The trend in 1988 for like mainstream metal is nothing but a good time. I mean, it is. That's a quintessential 1988 song.
Yeah.
Bad Medicine from Bon Jovi, quintessential 1988 song for mainstream MTV. And here comes Metallica 1. Now, again, I wasn't watching Headbangers Ball in that era. I didn't start watching really Headbangers Ball till like 91. So
I saw it at a friend's house, and it was
what was being played on Headbangers Ball. Was there a lot of underground thrash videos beyond 1? I mean, I think Exodus maybe made a couple videos, maybe, but even Slayer didn't really make a video till Seasons of the Abyss
until probably 90, 91.
Yeah, that's when I remember it. I remember it existed.
Seeing one on just like regular MTV.
For sure. Yeah, it was for sure there.
And that was just like, wow. I don't know. I don't think that was the first instance I heard the album, but it's the first instance to where I was paying more attention to the lyrics and how fucking. That's the most like serious I think I've ever seen the entire band.
Oh, it's frowns.
Frowns, and just like how you could just feel how heavy, not just the music, but like what they were talking about was, and you couldn't necessarily tell like just on the surface. I don't think I even knew that, Cliff was dead or anything. I didn't know any of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It wasn't, you'd have to read about that stuff. It wasn't just like a modern, like a thing you'd hear about on TV.
I was 8 when Cliff died, so like it was way off any radar screen.
So I wasn't even really paying attention to like the lineup, or like I didn't know people's names or any of that kind of stuff until probably like, I don't know. So I started picking up the albums and reading stuff, because I was getting copies of stuff from people and hearing stuff here and there. But
so this is the record you chose, is Injustice for All, kind of where we're kind of getting at. What does it for you?
It's probably it was the first heavy metal record that when I heard it, it's the first, like, I don't know if everybody has this instance, but where you physically feel it. Like I had an emotional, physical reaction hearing the record.
Sure.
And it felt important. It felt like the lyrics, just the song titles, were ominous, but they felt like there's really something, they had something to say. It wasn't just about like, talking about Satan, or like what was surrounding everything else at the time was just like excess and parties and girls. And like, this seemed like way more of a bigger deal.
And I mean, how many people,
weight of it,
like outside of like hardcore Metallica fans, I don't know how many people just kind of stumbling on, say, like Master of Puppets knew that it was about cocaine. I mean, like, I just think they thought it was like,
but they were able
dark,
to use metaphor.
Like,
which at the time for me, I didn't really understand what that was.
Yeah.
Like that, these are all like concepts that made me think about stuff, made me look up like what certain types of words meant and all this type of stuff. Like what is a Dyer's Eve?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Or
ask my mom.
Blackened talking about the planet dying and the environment.
Yeah.
And Justice for All kind of talking about, the failure of like the court systems and prisons.
Like the imagery on the covers, especially for Master of Puppets and for Injustice, are just like, there's these social statements too. They're not well, that one's a little more beating you over the head with it.
Yeah.
But
Lady Liberty.
Yeah. But for a teenager,
raped.
For a teenager, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
And it something that makes you stand up and think about something you normally would think is boring.
Oh yeah.
Or like, no, I don't care about what's on the news. It's like, no, this made me more, kind of like cognizant of what was happening in the greater world.
Dave Mustaine said it best. This is the news on Peace Sells. But you're right. I think, like socio-political conscious thrash is a gateway to how I got to where I am now, where I'm teaching history and teaching about global studies. And I'm intimately sort of interested in why things happened and, why we're fucked the way we are fucked, and social problems and political.
Yeah.
I mean, you could draw a line from Injustice for All to, Sepultura KSAD, and you're like, all of a sudden you're seeing the video for like Territory, and you're like, what the fuck is going on here? And you're seeing like third world, like Palestine, like Israel, like wars, and you're just kind of like, oh, this is different.
Like Sepultura was the first band that made me think about conflicts in a foreign country.
That's what I mean.
They lived under a dictatorship. Really?
Yeah.
That's what happened to them? It's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It made me like that. Heavy metal in general, blanket term, is the only kind of music that's ever made outside of awareness things being brought up by through like, gangster rap in the 90s or something.
Yeah.
That's the only type of music that's made me, I've investigated more things based on what's that word mean? What's this turn of phrase mean?
Yeah.
Like, it made me interested in the occult. It made me interested, all kinds of, it just made me like, everything was a raw nerve for, I want more.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's what this record summed up it justified every single bit of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I could see that.
It was like, skateboarder crowd was into it. Like, it seemed like across the board, everybody was like on board. Like, they got it. They felt the importance of it.
And did the skateboard crowd that maybe is coming more out of a, I don't know, punk or crossover background, and maybe not so much in Mount Pleasant, but do you think they weren't turned off by the fact that it was so kind of technical and progressive in a way? Did you hear any kind of feedback? No,
I mean, we didn't even talk about stuff like that either. But just like seeing people in like Thrasher or Trans World, like, people were wearing Pusshead Metallica shirts. And I think the fact that it was so blatantly political on the cover, that pulled punk kids in too.
Rock. Yeah,
and Pusshead, punk right there. So it's, I think it was one of those kind of things where everything kind of came together, though. Not until later did, you understand the whole, like, emotional, not the band didn't even understand it at the time.
Yeah.
It just kind of seeped out the emotional turmoil they were going through. They couldn't, this was like the Alcoholica era Metallica, the 599 EP era and stuff too. So it's young guys dealing with really heavy shit. The only way they knew how was through like music.
I can't remember. Is Newstead's, is he on 598?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's his first appearance, because that was 87. I think they put that out in between Masters and before
he's on
Justice.
He's on the cover.
He's on it. Okay. I can remember. I couldn't remember if Cliff had contributed anything to that before they did the international tour.
He could have been, I'm not sure, but as far as the cover is concerned,
okay. I think you're right, though. I think that's a record I don't think about as much as, like, I don't investigate it. You know what I mean? I don't even know if I own a physical copy of it on CD. I had it on cassette tape.
Okay.
But I don't know if I ever bought it on CD.
I got Garage Inc. They had that, and then all the new shit on it too. But.
Yeah, that's like something I should just pick up. It's probably something I've seen used.
It's been reissued a couple times recently too.
I'm like, oh, I know all those songs, but I just forget.
That's how I learned about the Misfits.
For sure.
Started learning about Diamond Head. Like, there was so much of a learning.
Killing
like,
Joke.
They were a band that was completely happy to, or completely willing to, like, show reverence to bands that, like, gave them inspiration.
Yeah.
That wasn't really anything I really understood at that point. No bands were really talking about influences outside of, God, I don't remember anybody talking about influences.
I remember, like, this is a stupid story, but I remember, like, it was weird when, I can't even believe I'm bringing this up. Because, again, I was like 10 years old, so I'm trying to process my brain as a 10-year-old, and 10-year-olds are not very smart. I don't know if you've ever been around a 10-year-old, but they are thinking about things, at least. They're trying to. They're
very curious.
Things. Yeah, they're trying. And I was self-proclaimed, as I've told the story before. Right out the gate, like, I think Poison was my first, like, favorite band, and when their second record came out in '88, they released a song called Your Mama Don't Dance and Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll. And I remember, like, MTV, like, talking about it, or somebody on the radio, and saying it was a cover song. And it was like the first time I thought about the fact that, like, what do you mean a cover song? Like, I guess I just didn't know that you did other people's songs before.
I never heard that term. I remember hearing the term, like, with Roy Orbison, like, he was doing like an old standard.
Got
which
it.
is basically a cover song as well.
Most 50s songs were old. I mean, Elvis didn't write any of his own songs. You know, Little Richard was having songs written for him. Really, Chuck Berry of that era was the only one like writing exclusively all his own songs and stuff like that. But yeah, it was weird. I think, you know, then like Tesla did Signs, and like I just remember like, oh, this is an old song from the set. And then I think I learned that Smoke in the Boys Room was like not a Motley Crue song, and I just remember being like, what's happening? You know,
that was kind of a thing. Yeah, they started to pick on in like Pretty Woman from Van Halen.
Yeah. But I think Pretty Woman had like, I was aware of that song, but I was so young when Diver Down came out that I don't know. I didn't know the history of it. And then I think I remember hearing the Roy Orbison song and just kind of being like, okay, this is all starting to make sense, you know.
I knew that because that was like one of the few bands my dad enjoyed.
Was into Roy Orbison, right?
We hear in the house. So.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure somebody told me something. Like, I'm sure driving around listening to music, my mom probably was like,
on the oldie station.
This is like, oh, this song you're liking, this is like somebody else's song, and being like, oh, okay. But you know, going back to Injustice, this is a conversation we were having like when we were kind of talking about how we wanted to do this patron show. Like, it's funny, like it's almost like counter to like our personalities that you like the prog metal Metallica, you know, versus like, you know, most people probably expect you to like Kill 'Em All or Ride more, and me maybe because I tend to kind of lean a little bit more into some of the technically kind of stuff, not as much maybe as Chris does, but a little bit in that category. That I don't know. So what is it about that, like from a sound standpoint, that still like kind of drags you? Is it purely nostalgia, or is there still like?
Oh no, I mean when did that thing come out? Probably in like 2-3 months ago. That like the ultimate box of Injustice for All came out. They had, I don't know, fucking 10 records and all this live stuff, and everything was remastered. And I hadn't listened to it in probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, and I went back and just listened to the whole album front to back. And then I went and listened to it again, and I listened to Dyer's Eve like 3 times.
Yeah.
And just that, I can't think of anything since that's done guitar harmonies like that affected me so much.
Yeah.
Like I can still feel like that feeling like of, it felt like powerful, but also like everything you cared about just died when you hear that twin, you know, the harmony part of, and toward, what is that, like the 5-minute mark or something in Dyer's Eve? Yeah. Right after the solo and it starts to come out.
Yep.
But like to feel the emotion, like viscerally emotional stuff about music, it's like I don't feel that very often at all anymore. And that's something that, to have that, I don't think it's just nostalgia pulling that back in. I think it's the emotions that they were kind of working through at that point still make it through the music.
Yeah, I think, and I know there's a song we'll talk a little bit about, you know, before we kind of wrap things up. But you know, you mentioned Dyer's Eve, and the end of And Justice for All is really personal, you know, like in hindsight, you know, it's kind of front loaded with all these like kind of political themes and World War I and, you know, all the kind of stuff that they're working through on side A. And then you get to kind of side B, and and I still think of it as side B because I listen to a cassette so much. And it was definitely a lawn mowing thing for me, you know, but like, you know, side B, you start to get into, you know, Frayed Hands of Sanity. You start kind of getting a little bit more kind of deep and personal. And Metallica had done that before. I mean, certainly Fade to Black and Welcome Home Sanitarium, I think, are dark kind of songs about like kind of mental health and, you know, stuff like that. But then you get to Live Is to Die, which is about Cliff, you know, and it's they're kind of working through some of that in a way. And then you get to Dyer's Eve, which is about James's like childhood and like, was the religion that he was raised under. It's a very weird form of Christianity that
it wasn't a Christian Science.
It's not Christian Science, but something along those where they reject a lot of medicine and a lot of it's very strict. It's not Baptist, but it's like weird offshoot. It's not Jehovah's Witness, is it?
I don't think so. That's
where you look that up.
Celebrate birthdays and stuff.
Yeah, see if you can figure that out. But I think, you know, you get something that, for as clinical and progressive and technical and all the things that you could maybe lob at the record as either, you know, critiques or positives depending on which side of the fence you're looking at. It's fascinating that it's Christian Scientist. Okay, it is. You get this sort of impenetrableness about the record, and yet at the end it's so deeply personal. You know, it's weird. Like it's almost like a contradiction, you know, or paradox or something like that. Because I feel like, you know, when we talk about Master of Puppets, the record that I sort of picked, you know, Battery's a nonsense song. Battery, the funny story about that is like they wrote it because they had to fill like 5 minutes, and they just like bashed out like this dumb fast thrash song, and it's awesome. It's great. Master Puppets, Drugs, Things That Should Not Be is going back to H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome Home Sanitarium, pretty self-explanatory. I think Damage Incorporated and Disposable Heroes are both like anti-war-ish kind of songs. I'm not really sure what Orion, if there's any...
The Constellation
I think it
big.
just might be, I love the song. It's probably one of my favorites from that. That's why we started with it. But yeah, I don't know if it hasn't, Call of Cthulhu is pretty apparently, Lovecraft sort of thing. I don't know if there's any like deeper kind of things kind of going on with Orion.
With Injustice, it was like, it was justified anger too, which I don't think I'd ever heard. Like,
it's a really angry record.
Like a lot of thrash and a lot of like just like the hair metal kind of stuff that was happening at the time was all about, having a good time and, fraternizing with women or whatever. And, as a young kid,
Toxic Waltz and Caught in a Mosh.
I didn't know what it was to party.
Yeah.
But I knew what it was to feel angry, and then to be angry, but to also have a point to it was kind of like a new idea.
Yeah.
Like to have outrage for a reason.
Sure.
And all the subjects on the record kind of made it make a whole lot more sense to me.
Yeah. And it's funny because that sort of outrage anger, I hadn't yet encountered Slayer, and when you get to like, first time, like you hear Araya scream on like Angel of Death, it almost like backs you up a little bit.
Yeah.
And you're like, whoa, there's legit, it's that record's like right here the whole time. It's right up in front of your face. And that is sort of interesting, like where, along the listening habit where you first encounter these kind of things or whatever. I think Injustice for All like has this like weird detached kind of element to it because of the anger almost too, but I think when I go back to that record a lot, and I love Injustice for All, I was telling Mark, I mentioned the headphone kind of thing, but I have distinct memories of like encountering To Live Is to Die and like stopping in my tracks, like as I was mowing the lawn and like pondering stuff. Like it was just, my mind wandered a lot during that record because the songs were so expansive and so long that there was like a space to sort of do that in.
That To Live Is to Die was, we talked about this off mic, but it said exactly what it needed to say without saying any words. Mm-hmm. It was all just purely instrumental.
Yeah, and you get a little spoken word at the end, but pretty much like you could tell like that whole story. Without, that's,
which I think is powerful in that way in movies. If you can express emotion without saying a word, it's all through visuals.
Yeah, visual language.
Yeah, or through audio. It's so like, I think that's why like it resonated so much, and like Metallica resonated so much in like South America. All across the world, because you could feel the energy in the music, and that was like you felt everything came through without having to understand the language.
Yeah,
and that's powerful. Sure. That's a powerful thing.
I think that's why like there's some people that get really attached to like silent cinema or something like that, or like it was such a hard transition to move out of that into sound,
into the talkies,
because there was something kind of international about like Chaplin or Buster Keaton or some of those kind of guys.
Yeah.
Because, they were telling it through their acting and their actions and things like that. And I think that's why like I'm drawn to some, not to get into kind of film stuff, but like, for me, when people are like, what we talk about war movies in my history class, when we're talking about like World War II and that stuff sort of comes up because the kids are interested in it. And, probably like you and I, that's how we learned about war probably for the first time was through like Hollywood and things like that.
It's an easy way to investigate it without knowing what
for sure. Vietnam, especially in our generation, was a lot of Vietnam movies in the 80s and stuff like that.
That was the kind of the impetus for so many different like action movies was this Vietnam War vet. That was just like, okay, we know that character type now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're kind of fucked in the head a little bit. But like Thin Red Line is a really interesting one for me because in some ways it also can be kind of detached because it's so the camera is just sort of allowing things to happen. In some ways, it's like the antithesis to like Saving Private Ryan. Mm-hmm. Spielberg is very like interactive with his camera. It's very raw, and that's cool. But I remember I was watching a John Ford documentary, and John Ford was talking about how he never moved the camera because then it becomes another character. he says that the camera should stay and the people move in and out of the camera as they need to, and the scene sort of unfolds and sort of happens. I think Orson Welles did that sometimes too.
Yeah.
Orson Welles did tricks sometimes, editing tricks more. Not to say that John Ford is great at editing as well, but I think when I watch like Thin Red Line and you're watching like nature kind of happen and you're watching like all these different things happen, the camera is very still and it's sort of just allowing a lot of breath. And a lot of people probably find Thin Red Line to be sort of pretentious or slow or whatever, in the same way like, you know, Tarkovsky with like Stalker or something like that. Like, but to me, like Terrence Malick, when he's on his game, is really natural in a way that like you see with like, you know, John Ford or something like that. And I appreciate that. It's a different type of style. It's not, you know, a lot of action movies feel the need to be very kinetic. Yeah. And I think there's something non-kinetic about Thin Red Line. And I think that, you know, probably if you're a soldier in the midst of war, some aspects of it feel kinetic. But I also think that when you're a soldier in the midst of war, there's some aspects that feel incredibly sort of like long drawn out and kind of like naturalistic, you know, where like you're kind of waiting for something to happen. And I feel like that movie captures that sort of like silence of war as much as Saving Private Ryan captures the sort of like insanity of like that moment of war or battle or something like that. So but yeah, so like that as a visual language is really interesting to me, you know, and that's kind of what you're saying in a way. It's like there's something peaceful sort of about that, and it's different, you know, it's like a different sort of way. And you know, as I teach this film class that I'm going to be kind of starting here in a few weeks, that's going to be the hardest thing for me, is to figure out how do I teach them the language of film, because they so much want, you know, we were just talking about this before, like now plots are like over explained and everything, like to this generation of kids, like everything is almost over explained and overdone. And so when you
have it all spelled out,
when you show them like Lynch, or you show them something where like the camera's just letting them like like there's an ambiguousness to it that like I think makes them uncomfortable probably, and that's good, but it's like not a natural feeling for them.
There's a confrontation that you get with a cameraman that doesn't move.
Yeah,
like everything now is on a gimbal, and like you see like big superhero movies, I don't know where the hell the camera operator is.
Yeah,
it's just this big like pneumatic arm thing that's kind of doing its thing and sliding on shit,
and then half of it's like digital effects, and you know, like it's all being seamlessly interactive, which is cool.
It's cool, but I don't know if
it's just different.
I appreciate film more. I think growing up in the 70s and 80s that everything had to be done. There was always, it wasn't like that was done. There wasn't like that was just done on the computer. It's like everything was physically done. Star Wars was so interesting because guys see that thing that went by? That was a guy made a model.
Yeah.
Out of 500 old tank model kits and pieces.
Sure. Yeah, there's something. The organicness of it is kind of cool, for sure.
There wasn't just like a blanket statement to say, well, this was done in post, or this was, you know, created on a computer through digital software. Like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Like,
for sure.
No, a guy made this puppet, and that's why, you know, and this guy performed this puppet, and that's why it's so, you know, that's why Frank Oz was so great.
Yeah, it's more like it's more humanistic in a way.
Yeah, like craftsmanship, and you're more aware of. I was more aware of like camera movement because it didn't happen. When it did happen, it was like for effect, or like you'd see it in like a De Palma movie, like or even with like Hitchcock and Vertigo, they do that like that reverse where they're pulling out but panning in at the same time to get that kind of effect. And
I mean, you know, one of the movies I usually show at the very beginning of my film class, just to sort of like use as like a standard bearer for like a lot of film techniques, is Jaws. Yeah, and that zoom in scene on the beach is like right on Roy Schneider, where like it's like, oh fuck, that moment, like it's happening, you know, like the attacks.
I don't know of a camera move since that has like kind of like summed up an emotion so good as what Hitchcock did originally with that. I think he might be the first to,
for sure, to
use that. But
and Spielberg's definitely a student of cinema, which is kind of why I use that as like,
it's easier to penetrate. Like people know Jaws, they know
at least they're aware of
color.
It. Yeah. Yep.
Well, it's color in a way that's not so expressive as, you know, Vertigo is.
Sure. Yep.
Vertigo is kind of a hard movie for a young kid to watch because it seems boring.
Sure. I might use it.
I would definitely use it.
I think I'm going to, because I think Vertigo, if you get it taught to you, is a movie you probably appreciate more. I mean, if I gave them Vertigo on their own, they might be like, huh? You know,
like Rear Window is easier for me as a kid to penetrate.
Oh, for sure.
But that kind of introduced you to a lot of these techniques as well. And then all the anticipation and build up and dread in
Yeah.
editing, and then you see, some of his later on stuff. You're like, okay,
Yep.
it makes a whole lot of sense.
I just picked up for my film class. The school actually bought it for me. The DVD of the Truffaut Hitchcock interview.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I need to see that.
And then I still haven't watched it, the Psycho documentary, the 78, where it's about the editing in Psycho. It just came out last year.
Okay, I don't think I've seen
it's
that.
all about like how radical that was.
Okay, because the Psycho DVD that came out years ago has the big long like Joseph Stefano interviews and stuff.
Yep.
They go through all the editing, and
this one's
all the
like
stuff as well.
specific just about that. So we'll have to check it out. I haven't watched it yet. So
it's the most famously edited scene in movie history.
That and like that montage and Battleship Potemkin, I think, are like the two most
dissected,
like important ones. I mean, De Palma did like an ode to the Potemkin one in Untouchables with the baby carriage sequence and stuff like that. I think my favorite montage of all time, though, as much as I appreciate those others, is the end of the first Godfather. That's for me.
Okay.
The cuts to the baptism of the child, to all the murders, to like, it's just this like, it's incredibly Catholic, it's incredibly violent, it's incredibly like, it's just like, it's showing the sort of like hypocrisy of like that life, and kind of like what Sopranos did. Sopranos in a way confronted you with the fact that your protagonist is like kind of like evil. And you're like, oh shit, like,
why do I like
this is who I'm rooting for, kind of. Like, he's like murdering all these people while he's like trying to be a family man.
Well, and the funny thing, I think a lot of my wife watches this terrible show, and she'll admit it, The Good Doctor. Have you ever seen this?
My mother likes The Good Doctor a lot.
The autistic surgeon. It gives her like those kind of cathartic, like, just like I need to feel something.
Speaking of Hitchcock, isn't that the kid that plays young?
He's in Bates Motel.
Norman Bates, yeah.
But what it's
Freddie
like,
Highmore.
It's reduced the montage down to this formulaic, like musical montage thing that Baywatch, I think, really kind of
Grey's Anatomy, I think, ran that.
Yeah,
in the 2000s.
Every episode, everybody like panned by this like shitty, Ed Sheeran song or something that's playing at the end.
Everything kind of. Emotionally comes together.
It kind of like neuters it when you see it that often. Yeah. When you see it in like a classic movie, you're like,
I know.
So it's going to be you're fighting an uphill battle with teaching film techniques.
It's going to be really interesting. I might make a lot of mistakes. This is the first year I'm ever teaching it, and I might have to go back to the drawing board or punt a few times. It's always knowing how much of the old stuff do I show, because I want them to appreciate cinema. So there's kind of a tipping point. I think I show them maybe Chaplin and maybe a Buster Keaton one, because I've tended to find that they can kind of appreciate like the comedies, because the comedies kind of resonate. Yeah. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on silent cinema. I might show them Hugo, which is the Scorsese movie about George Millet and like the early, just as like I sneak in a Scorsese movie, which, and B, like it's kind of more of it's like kind of showing Singing in the Rain to teach like the transition of talk to or silent to talk, like that's an easier way of like doing it than like lecturing on it sometimes.
It's tough to even show
maybe
full
a
movies
cheat, but
of that stuff, because you think people are just going to be like, bored out of their minds.
But we'll see who's in it, but it'll be an experiment. I'm sure I'll reflect on it on the podcast a little bit. But I guess before we kind of get too far off track, I want to come back to Injustice, because this is a conversation you and I were kind of having like prior, so we were kind of warming up. Is this idea of for a lot of people, I'm guessing for our generation, because we kind of grew up in a weird era where a lot of the 70s prog stuff, outside of like maybe Tom Sawyer on the radio, you didn't hear that stuff unless like you had an older brother or a dad or somebody that had like those old Genesis and Yes records and Rush records. Yeah. In a way, is Injustice for All, like, do you see that as kind of like a teenage manual for like prog, like complicated songs that you have to sort of like process with like multiple movements and like,
well, and it could be considered prog because it's more complicated. It has more ideas than what's on the face value. Yeah. Because the prog stuff itself wasn't just having progressive elements. I don't think turned me off. Mm-hmm. Or I don't even think I thought about it.
Well, I don't think you knew you were supposed to think about it, because
it challenged it challenged my listening, for sure. And especially with as much as people like to shit on Lars, his his drumming on that, it was never what I expected. And then it almost informed what I expected later on. And also playing, playing drums, like he would accent a snare hit or something where I would not, it doesn't make sense to do it really.
Yeah.
But it makes sense in the context of Metallica. And that was kind of his like moment to shine as far as having like just weird options, like stuff that just you wouldn't think he would do. And some of that you can kind of hear in like some Merciful Fate stuff as well. I don't know if that was pulled off him or not, but the way he would accent things and the way sometimes like his drumming was probably going faster than it should have been for the rest of the song, but it works in the context of all this.
What it kind of sounds like, you mentioned Merciful Fate, but the feeling, like the first time I really started to like process like Abigail, Mickey D seemed to be going too fast. Mm-hmm. Like almost kind of like off the rails sometimes, like, and not in a bad way. I love it.
We're so used to like growing up with like guitars set the tone, and the rhythm section was just that was kind of in the background. Yeah. But to have that where you've got like a double time drum on a slower guitar. Yeah. That's something that Dismember did that a lot. Sure. Yeah. Funnily, but like that, the first time I think I ever really encountered that was probably this album. Okay. Where it kind of made sense to me. It didn't turn me off. It like, oh, that sounds cool. That makes sense.
It's interesting that like that aspect of the rhythm section was so like spotlighted when, of course, the like major critique you hear about the record is the lack of bass. Yeah. I wonder if like because Cliff wasn't there, if Lars was like overcompensating for the rhythm section's complexity because Cliff had done so much accenting and different things with the bass to sort of add texture to songs.
I know that he wanted to be heard, but also the warmth on that record there's no warmth on that record.
That's what I mean. It's very clinical.
It makes sense that it's
tight. Everything feels like tense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's the whole thing. Like it's tense, it's cathartic, it's angry and calculated. It's a really, really good the reason everything is there's a point for all of it. Yeah. There's a reason there's no bass on the record. It makes sense now, not just like hearing all the stories, the context. Yeah, it's not a punishment for which Newsted. I mean, he was punished for years.
I know.
And they've apologized. Like we didn't know what we were doing. We were drinking. Like we didn't have any type of. We didn't realize what we were doing to you. I know. We were taking out all of our emotions on you.
So do you think? I know Injustice like is a attempt to reconcile with the death of Cliff, but do you think that the hangover of that just sort of carried over the next like decade, and that's kind of why like Jason leaves? And
I think so.
They just couldn't kind of fully deal with it and process it.
Yeah, I mean they've even said that they had is it David Frick? Is that the guy from Rolling Stone? He moderated a talk with them when Injustice for All got reissued. Mm-hmm. It's like a 40-minute thing you can see on YouTube, all shot in black and white. Cool. But kind of going through all that stuff, talking, and everybody's very kind of effusively like, yeah, we ran him through the ringer. We didn't know how to deal with what was happening.
It's kind of a metaphor for those guys because in a way that's kind of how they treated Mustaine. They just kind of fired him and didn't like explain why. Yeah. And that was what he was always like fucking butthurt about.
That's why when they got Robert, they wanted him to know that you're our guy. Here's $1 million. Yeah. Like all that stuff, everything makes a lot more sense with age.
Yeah, for sure.
And these guys aren't that much older than, what are they, like early 50s or something? Like maybe 10 years my senior or something?
Yeah, but, probably.
It takes a long fucking time to mature.
Yeah, especially a male.
And when you're in that type of like hyper testosterone environment, lots of anger, lots of alcohol, touring is terrible for anybody's fucking mental health.
Yeah. And they were constantly on tour through this era,
So I'm surprised they made it through as good as they did. Yeah. And then after that, the extensive touring cycle for the Black record was just stupid.
Yeah, the shit binge live and shit tour. I mean, there were videos on Headbangers Ball for like 2 years just off of that, let alone the Black album. Yeah. Which I'm happy for because that's really where like they pumped Search and Destroy.
I think a wider audience kind of got to like get some of their back catalog
for sure. Well, and it was on Headbangers Ball. Like there would be a live performance of For Whom the Bell Tolls and Search and Destroy and something off Kill 'Em All. I'm trying. It's not Motor Breath. What's the song that they were always playing? Whiplash. They were doing a live performance of Whiplash a lot. So you know, so like, I don't know, like it was an education, like a gateway for different people. But yeah, it's interesting because I love for And Justice for All. It gets slagged sometimes by some people because of the bass stuff and because it's not as warm as the previous kind of records and stuff like that. But I think it does it holds up in its own right as, and I guess I never thought about that the bass is not there for a reason.
Yeah. They lost the bass.
Yeah.
Why you can't replace that right now. We have to work. Like, you're just here to help us out, but we got to make it through this before we can really let you come through on the next album.
And it's interesting when the songs tell, like the songs or even albums tell those kind of internal stories, subconsciously sometimes,
That's why it's so rewarding to like look at this stuff in retrospect.
Sure.
Any of this stuff. Like, I think I understand black metal more. I appreciate it more now than, it's a bunch of kids trying to fit in doing shit. It's not evil.
Yeah, exactly.
It's trying like one-upsmanship stuff. Like the story behind this stuff is so much more interesting than what the surface stuff is.
Yeah, and we talk, it's interesting because that comes up a lot in my rock and roll history class when like I explain like why they did songs this way versus that way. When I start my rock history class off, one of the first things I do is I play both versions of Hurt because I think it's an interesting dichotomy, and you can use that to kind of talk about like how artists can take one song and reinterpret it and do something with it. And the Nine Inch Nails version is very disparate and kind of like almost like fading away in a lot of ways. Like the vocals are kind of like buried. There's a sort of dissonant sort of white noise sound going on, like in the background the whole time, whereas like the Johnny Cash version is obviously much more singer-songwriter, kind of stripped down sort of thing, and
it's like naked and right there, like and the context of that, he's like dying,
he's at the end of his life,
It's like,
in the Nine Inch Nails version is at the end of a concept record where the song previous, the title track, Downward Spiral, the main character who's been going through all these things for 13 songs has killed himself, and you hear a gunshot and a scream as like he's dying at the end of track 13, and then Hurt is the last song, and that's like the sort of disparate spirit of your soul like fading to nothingness, and so the song is like eroding kind of before your eyes, and there's like, it almost is like a ghost like watching themselves like kind of fade from like, you know what I mean? It's like, if you don't understand the context of that, you're like, why is this song recorded so kind of shittily? Like it's not clear, like, there's impetus is to it, you talk about like the industrial music. Why does it sound mechanical? Well, because it's trying to represent the sort of like technology and like, it's like dystopian stuff, why is dystopian stuff so dark? Well, it's because it's
taking the human element out of music to some degree.
Exactly. So in a way it's like a dystopian sort of prog record, And it's funny because like from And Justice for All, I can draw a direct line, and I know like this is not a band that does as much for you now as maybe when you were younger, but like I can draw a line directly because I remember buying And Justice for All and then like almost immediately getting into like Queensryche Empire, which was another really socially conscious album. Like they were talking about drugs and crime and all these different, and so like for like a young mind, you almost needed these sort of like stepping stones to get into like music that actually was like not nothing but a good time, like to kind of walk towards something.
It was tough because it was something you had to actively seek out. There wasn't YouTube it was harder to penetrate this stuff, and you had to take that extra, step of, well, am I going to spend $8 on a tape just to try it out?
Yeah.
I've heard the one song, it sounds pretty okay, but is the whole thing going to be all right?
I know. And I think sometimes what Metallica had going for them was reputation. They had great album covers.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Injustice for Now, the cover, you just want to buy it. It fucking looks just amazing.
All the other extra like surrounding imagery is all done by Pusshead.
Yeah.
That's some of the best like cover art and then merch of any like album cycle I can think of.
When I think all like you look at like
it's a white cover too.
Metallica sort of like schemes their visual imagery. Ride the Lightning, the sort of blues and whites and that Master of Puppets, like what shade is that? It's a red, but it's such a like iconic shade, that
it's
that
like a saturated,
spine.
a lot of yellow saturation in it as well.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It's got like almost like a light maroon sort of aspect to it that I think is just incredibly iconic. It's not like a red you've seen like anywhere else, and so I think Metallica was really smart in their marketing in that sort of aspect.
Yeah.
Even the Black Album even the cover, the Load and Reload with whatever the art scheme was to that, like it was Common
Blood, man.
It got people talking, on some level. I think you arrive at a sort of a bankruptcy of ideas when you get to like Saint Anger, and then I think it's just like almost like
struggle for relevancy again.
Like rich dudes just trying to like poke the bear to like do something that was like challenging themselves to be like kind of raw again without like, I don't know.
That's the reason why I don't really disparage any of their eras, because what do you have to be like when you're so hungry when you're doing Kill 'Em All?
Yeah.
And then you have all this massive success, and then you have somebody help you refine your vision with a Black Album. What the fuck do you do after that?
Yeah.
That's kind of it. I can't. So when you're a millionaire, what is there to struggle about? Mm-hmm. Can you really write that same type of music, especially lyrically? I don't think Hetfield's really been able to like grab, that he wrote a lot of good stuff, but I mean, the last 30 years,
it's been tough. Yeah. I mean, 30, what's 30 take? No, I'd say 20, because 91, well, 2001, almost 30 years.
Almost
You're
30
right.
years.
Yeah, you're right. Shit, we're getting old. Yeah.
So they've had like 2/3 of their career is kind of shit.
Yeah. I mean, there's some.
I don't hate Death Magnetic, but it's got a lot of turds on it.
For sure. I think the last two records have some hopefulness. I think
they're too long.
Yeah.
They desperately need somebody to say, okay, guys, that's cool. You got all these riffs, but let's just do 8 good songs and not do 12 okay songs.
Yeah. They're almost like, they're beyond anybody being able to kind of like edit them, or like you said, they're almost like they're so disconnected from reality sometimes that they almost don't know how to police themselves.
Well, they're like an institution.
Yeah.
They've got, I don't know how many people they employ. It's got to be insane. They own all of their own, what do you call it? They own all their music, the rights to all their music.
Gotcha.
Their, what is that called?
Publishing rights?
They're all their publishing rights. Yeah. So like the amount of, and they reissue the shit they're actually pretty judicious about how often they reissue stuff.
Yeah.
But they're putting out these definitive collections and stuff. They're great archivists.
Yeah.
There's like every single thing you could possibly ever want to know about every record is in there.
That's the cool part, I guess, when you get down to it, as much as people complain about like Lars or somebody like that, but he's still, I think, a fan. Deep down inside, is like as removed from reality as he might be at times,
But he's a cheerleader. He's incredibly enthusiastic about shit, and that's, I think, what got him half their success.
For sure. His chutzpah was like
he was willing to kick the door down.
Yep.
But he had the confidence of like, well, look what James wrote.
Yep. Yeah, he was like a salesman. He was a salesman the band needed.
But he also is great with aesthetics as far I'm not gonna say anything about what he said what he did for the record cover of the last record. But as far as him being able to take ideas and like, well, that's kind of cool. What if we do it like this?
Yeah.
And he has a good ear for that type of stuff.
You paint him in like the same light as like Kerry King or Gene Simmons, where like they're kind of the de facto spokespeople. So they take a lot of bullets probably, and they kind of have to come off a certain air to them.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
I mean, I think Lars is like probably the warmest and fuzziest of those three. I think Gene's probably the cockiest, and Kerry's kind of just the...
But also Gene is the least talented of that group you mentioned.
Got it.
The stuff he writes is kind of trite.
Yeah.
Paul is like the real... Paul and I think Ace are probably the best songwriters out of that group.
Yeah.
Gene was more the confrontational one.
Sure. He's the demon.
He's the demon. He was the one as a kid you think is more interesting, but as I age, I think Ace is my favorite out of all those guys.
Sure.
But I love Paul's sappy 50s bullshit too.
Yep. And Kerry's just...
Kerry needed Jeff though too.
Yeah, it's true. Now that he's
those
untethered.
guys are so much like Paul and Gene. It's crazy when you think about it now, because I think...
Or even James and Lars. James is kind of quiet, and Jeff was quiet all the time.
But Jeff wrote the best riffs, and then Kerry kept the fuel of the whole band going. But he was also a great great writer as well, but he needed he needed somebody. He couldn't be the sole writer in the band like he kind of is for the last record.
I mean, I think opposing forces are really important to creativity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just, something. And I think I don't know. I think that's why, when I come back to full circle to Masters and stuff like that, is Cliff was such a opposing force that was just different than those other three. Coming from, he was the only one that came from the Bay Area. He, like I said, he was bell bottoms. He was into kind of 70s rock and things that not to say those guys weren't, but they were just different. And they kind of
But they were also willing to listen because they were coming from the LA scene, just was not inviting.
Yep.
At that era, with not like how the punk and thrash scene was in San Francisco, Death Angel, and then they played with fucking DOA and the Germs and all this other shit. So it was the weird hardcore shit and metal. I think it was kind of. I mean, we go off on this shit forever.
Sure.
But the whole finally meeting of the minds of crossover is what extreme metal is. It's the most important thing to ever happen to extreme metal.
Yeah.
For punks to get over themselves and metal guys to get over themselves, the shit you're doing is pretty cool. Yeah, the stuff you're doing is pretty cool.
Which is why, you look at a band like Discharge kind of in the middle of some of that and stuff. It's made me, I think, appreciate, I always loved Suicidal Tendencies, but I didn't understand their place in history or, even old COC or, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we, like I said, we weren't avoiding talking about Metallica. We just didn't know kind of how to kind of reproach it a little bit. And hopefully we said some interesting things here. I'm sure you have a Metallica album that sort of speaks to you maybe as patrons out there.
And if there's younger people that have something to say about any of the newer stuff, I'd be willing to entertain it.
I mean, I can find, if you were to tell me that Load was your gateway in because you were 10 years old when Load came out, that makes sense to me. I mean, there's catchy elements to songs. There's some good songs on Load that I like, but if it's Saint Anger, I don't know. I'm curious because I don't.
Success is a tough thing, man. Same with filmmakers. We go back and forth with that. Artistic filmmakers with integrity, then they do just this piece of shit because they need to pay the bills.
Yeah,
it's a tough. But there's so many factors to all of it. It's we've got families now, we've got wives, we've got commitments, and it's tough. Trying to commoditize art is a really difficult thing.
Sure,
let me tell you about it.
Yeah, and I think. I remember there's a great quote.
Monetize, not commoditize.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there's a great quote about Hank Williams Sr. that comes from a documentary that I write, that I show in class when I kind of introduce early country music and stuff. And Hank Williams Sr. was so important to, Johnny Cash and Dylan and so many people. And I think it's a guitar player that used to play with Tom Petty, Marty Robbins, I think is his name. And he says...
The Marty Robbins?
The Marty Robbins, yeah.
The Marty Robbins.
Yeah, I think...
The country western guy?
Yeah, long hair, dark hair.
No, Marty Robbins is a goofy looking guy.
Maybe it's not him. It's Marty somebody.
Name.
Yeah. But he kind of says, Hank Williams did a lot of sins in his life and did a lot of bad shit. And he's like, but the songs forgive him for everything because he left that. And I think you look at just even if you just go with the first four Metallicas, you can include the Black Album in there or whatever. But I think you look at that legacy of that, and regardless of your bitterness or how you feel with the music that sort of happened in the last 25 plus years with Metallica, you can't ignore that. So people want to get real butthurt about Metallica or get up in arms because they're not making Ride the Lightning Part 2 or whatever, and that's fine. But it's like punk rock. Punk rock is a youthful institution, and I think thrash in some ways can be sort of a youthful institution. How Slayer for a long time was able to go back to the well so successfully, more than other bands, is pretty unique. I don't think that's common.
It is an extreme metal though.
What's that? Yeah,
it's weird how that. But the thing is, they never. The extreme metal bands never reach the success that Metallica or even. I mean, Slayer's the only one to reach that type of critical success that also kept a certain amount of integrity as far as the sound was concerned.
I also think Slayer had they were on MTV the least of the big four. I think
the only time they were on was
it was Seasons of the Abyss. Yeah. And so I think Slayer tasted success a bit, but they weren't the arena band that especially Megadeth and Metallica I think were at a certain point. I think Anthrax danced around it, especially when Bring the Noise and a few things. I think they were kind of hitting like a cultural sort of apex with that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that's kind of kept them.
They never had enough. I don't think Anthrax ever had enough to say.
Yeah, that's true.
They're more fun.
Yeah, for
party
sure.
band or whatever.
For sure.
Megadeth always had stuff they were talking about or Dave was interested in, but
But I guess I don't know. So that's my hot take on Metallica at the end of the day is like, you know, if you're butthurt about this you know, the last kind of decades of Metallica, just again, I think their first 4 records at least excuse that. You know, like we have that. You know, they gave us that. They gave us, you know,
what
a
more
foundation.
Do you want?
That's, I mean, yeah. just ignore Saint Anger, you know, ignore if you're pissed about Lulu that it came out, like they didn't care. They just wanted to work with Lou Reed probably because
I when that thing came out, I was like, oh God, what the fuck? But now like knowing more about, you know, Velvet Underground, Lou Reed's Transformer, all this kind of solo stuff, his personality, his, kind of big, larger than life persona that he would even want to work. What a fucking honor that would be. You're not going to be like, nah, it's okay.
Why not?
Yeah.
You know, why not? I mean, it's like if Bowie wanted to work with you, like, who gives a shit what Bowie wants to do? Just do it.
You could just fart in a harmonica. And that's totally cool.
Like you worked with Bowie, you know, it's like something you can kind of hang your hat on. So,
and after you've hit a certain amount of success, you know, musically,
you probably need those challenges.
Yeah, those kind of things come up, and if you can rise to the occasion, cool. If not, then at least you tried.
Sure.
You know, some asshole on his computer at home bitching about the Lulu record that, you know, can't even put some pants on.
couple dumbasses recording a podcast talking about Metallica 40 years later.
Trying to be positive, you know.
We try. I mean, we can be contrarian about stuff as well, but
sure. I always have the artist's best interests in mind.
Sure.
I care so much is why I get angry.
Yeah, I get that. The older I get, it's interesting, especially doing like the history of Heavy Metal Countdown, teaching the rock class, is I've become less bitter and less angry and more open to more things because I've just sort of like had to consider them contextually.
Yeah,
it's why like,
and it's easier too. You got to
help me get over like Manowar and help me get over. I was like, okay, they're important for this. Like, it's not my favorite thing, but they're like, they fit here and they fit here. And
holding on to bitterness doesn't really do you a whole lot.
I mean, there's still some shit I hate, and I actually take pride in hating it. It's kind of fun. It's like an exercise.
We're not gonna do a Nickelback show. or anything, but,
you know, and they're a fun band to sort of beat up.
Somebody or something that has done something good at some point. There's always a reason to go back and look at it and see why and where it went off the tracks, and the story behind it is, you know, intensely interesting to me.
Absolutely, and that's why we did a contrarian kind of episode. It's not so contrarian, but at least like where we just kind of, you know, I don't know if you want to call me a Master of Puppets guy, Mark and Injustice for All guy. It's fine. Whatever. You can do that, you know, but I don't think Mark and I dislike any of the first 4 records really that much.
I like all 5. The first 5, really, I think, are
and I'm a load apologist. I don't love all of it, but I think there's some stuff happening on it. But
it's better than Dysfunctional by Dokken, I'll say that.
No, Dysfunctional is great.
I don't think so. Really? No.
I would argue that.
I'm not a fan.
No, not at all.
It sounds like they're trying too hard to be modern.
See,
that's a symptom of the times as well, though.
Yeah.
That's something you don't have to do.
I some great songs on that. It's maybe not the best Dokken record, but it's like a good record.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's probably like why...
If it was just a Don Dokken solo record, it wouldn't have been met with quite so much.
Yeah, I think they adjusted better than other bands did to the 90s. I'll give them that. No one expected Dokken to write like a decent rock record.
Nobody
in the
asked
90s.
for it. Yeah.
Well, their last record was 87 and Dysfunctional's 94. So all of a sudden, 7 years later, the original guys get back together and then make a competent record that didn't sound like they were trying to retread like 80s stuff.
Not at all. That was
and maybe that's
it was one of the first promos I got from I think it was on Columbia or something.
It was.
I got a full press pack. I was like, what the fuck do I get this for? We're doing a death metal magazine.
And out of context, so when was the last time you listened to
There's some resentment. Not too long ago, but it wasn't. I got to be in a mood.
Gotcha. I hear you. I would make an argument this though. If you wanted to argue this, I would agree with you. Skid Row Subhuman Race is the best post 80s metal record. It's the okay, let me put it this way. If Sound of White Noise is the best adjustment to trends of the 90s that any of the big 4 did, that's what Subhuman Race is for me.
Okay.
Like it's Skid Row, like Skid Row could already point it to it with Slave to the Grind that they were going to be able to like survive hair metal because they weren't really hair metal. They just kind of were like in it, you know, a little bit. But
Go by association.
I would go to bat for that record any day of the week. It holds up great. It's just a great mid-90s, I don't know, alternative metal record or something like that. But anyways, it's a whole different episode, I think. So
maybe next month.
Yeah, exactly. You decide to pick To Live Is To Die, right? To go out.
Yes.
Because we talked about how just the emotion of it all.
Yeah, the twin, the back and forth twin harmonies there toward the end are just like, they're just burned in my brain.
Yeah, and
it's
almost like classical music in a way too. The symphonic kind of qualities to it. The guitar swells,
and the song is like it goes from like, it seems like it hits all the like acceptance, like all the levels of grief,
denial
kind of thing,
yep,
and then
anger.
at the end it kind of comes back a little
triumphant.
bit. Yeah.
Yep.
Not necessarily like beating everything, but like, okay, fuck, I can handle this kind of thing. So.
Yeah, it's very cathartic. It's good. It's cool.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we started with the bass solo from Cliff at the beginning on Orion, and here we process the grief of Cliff as well. So thank you, patrons. Hopefully you dug this. We finally did address Metallica, hopefully to your liking.
It's another probably 2-hour episode here, so hopefully you enjoy our ramblings.
Patrons, you know where to find us. You've already found us, so I don't need to sell anything on that, but just give us some feedback on how you like the Patreon episodes. If you want us to continue in this kind of realm, or if there's other ideas you want us to try, because Mark and I, we want to make these kind of easy and digestible for he and I, so we have to do a lot of research, but we also want to like have an anchor that we can kind of work around.
Kind of less music, more talking.
Yeah,
but if it's about a certain idea for a band or something, that's,
or if it's like a record where you don't think we could do a mainstream thing on, because it's kind of just, I don't know, like we're looking for stuff like that, like whatever ideas. We're really open on this Patreon thing. But so cool. For To Live Is To Die from Injustice for All, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.
Enjoy.
are the pale nets, which men must call their lives. All this I cannot bear to witness any longer. They're not the kingdom of salvation.